My name is Hannah Caldwell. I am 31 years old, and I work as a pediatric nurse in a small hospital just outside Charlotte, North Carolina. 2 weeks ago, on a quiet Thursday evening, I walked into a steakhouse downtown and saw something that nearly made me drop my purse on the floor. My 58-year-old father was sitting at a corner booth with a woman who was definitely not my mother. He was leaning across the table, laughing the way he used to laugh on Sunday mornings when Mom made pancakes. He reached for her hand, and she didn't pull away. My hand started shaking so badly I had to grip the hostess stand to stay upright. I pulled out my phone, recorded almost a full minute of video, and sent it straight to my mother with 3 words underneath. 22 minutes later, she walked through that restaurant door, and what happened next still wakes me up at night. But before I tell you the rest, please take a second to like the video and subscribe to Heartway Stories, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let me start from the beginning. That Thursday had been one of the longest shifts of my month. I'd been on my feet for 13 hours straight, dealing with a little boy who'd swallowed a button battery and a pair of frantic parents who needed more comforting than the child did. When I clocked out at 6, all I wanted was a hot shower and leftovers from the fridge. But my husband Daniel had texted me around 4 in the afternoon saying he'd made a reservation at Roland's, the steakhouse on Sycamore Street that we used to go to before we got married, back when we were still figuring each other out and every dinner felt like an event. We hadn't been there in over 4 years. I sat in the hospital parking lot for a minute, reading his message twice. He'd written, "I miss you, let's do this. 8 o'clock, wear that green dress." I felt this little flutter in my chest, the kind I hadn't felt in a long time. Daniel and I had been married for 6 years, and somewhere in the last 2 of those, we'd stopped doing things like this. He worked as a project manager for a construction company, and his hours had gotten brutal. I picked up extra shifts because we were trying to save for a house with a real backyard, somewhere our future kids could actually run around. Between his early mornings and my late nights, we'd become 2 people who shared a bed and a Netflix account but barely shared a conversation anymore. I drove home, took the longest shower I'd had in weeks, and put on the green dress. It still fit, which felt like a small miracle. When I came downstairs, Daniel was waiting in a button-down shirt I'd bought him for his birthday 2 years ago, the one he never wore because he said it was too nice for every day. He looked up at me and just smiled. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. We drove to Roland's holding hands across the center console like we were 19 again. The restaurant was exactly the way I remembered it. Dim amber lighting, white tablecloths, soft jazz playing somewhere overhead, the smell of butter and seared meat in the air. The hostess walked us to a table near the back, past couples leaning in toward each other, past a birthday celebration on the right, past a window that looked out onto the brick alley. We sat down, and, for the first 10 minutes, neither of us touched our menus. We just talked. Daniel asked me about the little boy with the battery, and I asked him about the warehouse project he'd been stressing over for months. We laughed about a memory from our honeymoon when I'd gotten violently seasick on a snorkeling boat in Key West, and he'd had to carry me back to the hotel. He told me he'd been thinking about that trip a lot lately. He said he wanted to take me back there for our anniversary in October. I felt something inside me unclench for the first time in a long, long time. I reached across the table, and he wrapped his hand around mine. And that's when my mind drifted, the way it always does, to my parents. Robert and Linda Caldwell, married 34 years next March. They were the reason I believed in marriage at all. Growing up in our little house in Asheville, I would come downstairs in the morning and find them in the kitchen, my mom in her robe, my dad behind her with his arms around her waist while she stirred eggs on the stove. They danced in the living room sometimes, when nobody else was watching, just swaying to whatever song was playing on the radio. My dad called my mom Linny, nobody else, just him, and the way he said it always sounded like a prayer. They were the gold standard. They were the reason I'd waited for Daniel, and the reason I'd believed Daniel was the one when I finally met him. So when I glanced over Daniel's shoulder and my eyes landed on the booth in the far corner, my brain refused to process what it was seeing. There was my father. The same gray hair. The same navy blazer he'd had for 10 years, the same gold watch my mother had given him for their 25th anniversary. And across from him, holding his hand across the table, was a woman maybe in her late 40s, with auburn hair pinned up loosely, wearing a black dress with a thin gold necklace. They were leaning toward each other. He was smiling at her in a way I had only ever seen him smile at my mother. She laughed at something, he said, and he reached up and tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear. I think my heart actually stopped beating for a second. The blood drained out of my face so fast I felt dizzy. Daniel noticed immediately. He squeezed my hand and asked what was wrong, his voice tight with concern. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even point. I just stared. He turned around slowly, following my gaze, and I watched the color drain from his face too. Is that, he whispered, but he couldn't finish the sentence either. It was him. There was no question. My father, the man who had walked me down the aisle 6 years ago, the man who had cried during his speech at my wedding because he loved my mother so much he wanted me to find someone like her, was sitting in the back of a romantic steakhouse holding another woman's hand. I felt sick. Actually, physically sick. I picked up my water glass and my hand was trembling so badly that ice clinked against the rim. Daniel kept his eyes on me, watching, waiting. I whispered to him that I needed to record it. He looked horrified for a second and then he just nodded slowly because we both knew. We both knew nobody would believe this otherwise. We both knew what this would do to my mother and how she would need proof, hard proof, before she could even begin to accept it. I slid my phone out of my purse and pretended to be checking my messages. I angled the camera toward the corner booth and tapped record. For almost a full minute, I filmed them. I caught my father lifting her hand to his lips and kissing her knuckles. I caught her resting her cheek against his palm. I caught him smiling at her like she was the only person in the world. When I stopped recording, I felt like I'd just witnessed a murder. I opened my messages and pulled up my mother's name. My fingers hovered over the screen. Daniel watched me, completely silent. I knew that the second I sent that video, I would be lighting a fire in my mother's life that I might not be able to put out. I knew that 34 years of marriage would shatter on her phone screen. But I also knew that she deserved the truth. I would have wanted somebody to send it to me. I attached the video. I typed, "Mom, I'm so sorry. Look." I hit send before I could change my mind. For a long time, nothing happened. Daniel and I sat there pretending to look at our menus, occasionally glancing toward the corner booth, where my father and that woman kept talking and laughing like nothing in the world existed beyond their candle. The waiter came. We ordered something, anything, just so he would leave. I kept refreshing my messages. No reply. After about 12 minutes, I started to wonder if maybe she had her phone on silent. Maybe she was already in bed. Maybe she would see it in the morning and the world would only end at sunrise. I was almost relieved. I was almost ready to stand up and just leave. And then the front door of the restaurant opened. My mother walked in. Linda Caldwell. 60 years old, in a tan trench coat she'd thrown on over her gray sweater and jeans. Her hair was pulled back the way she wore it when she was just going to the grocery store. She hadn't even put on lipstick. Her eyes were already red. She didn't see us. She wasn't looking for us. She walked straight past the hostess, past the couples and the birthday party, her eyes scanning the room with terrifying focus until they found him. And when they did, she stopped breathing for a second. I watched her chest just freeze. Then she started walking toward the corner booth. She didn't run. She didn't yell. She walked, slowly and deliberately, and the click of her shoes on the wood floor cut through the soft jazz like a metronome counting down to something terrible. People started to notice. Conversations dropped to whispers. The waiter froze with a tray in his hand. By the time she was halfway across the dining room, the entire restaurant was watching. My father didn't notice her until she was almost at the table. He was laughing at something the woman said, and then he glanced up, and his entire face just collapsed. The smile vanished. His hand pulled back from hers like he'd touched a hot stove. The woman across from him saw the change in his expression and turned around, and when she saw my mother standing there, she went pale. My mother didn't sit down. She just stood there, looking at him, and the silence at that table was the loudest thing I have ever heard in my life. "So," she finally said, and her voice was so quiet I could barely hear it from 2 tables away, "This is what it looks like." My father opened his mouth. Nothing came out. 34 years, she said. 34 years, Robert. The woman across from him started to stand up, started to say something, but my mother held up one hand without ever taking her eyes off my father, and the woman sat back down. "I knew," my mother said. "I want you to understand that. I knew something was wrong. I have known for months. The way you stopped looking at me when I came into a room. The way you started taking your phone into the bathroom. The way you stopped reaching for me at night. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself it was just stress, just work, just getting older." A tear slid down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. "I made you breakfast every morning of our marriage," she said. "Every single morning, even when I was sick. Even when I was tired. Even when the kids were screaming. I made you coffee the way you like it, with the cream poured in first, because you said it tasted better that way." Her voice cracked. "And this is what I get." My father's lips were moving, but no sound was coming out. He looked like a man who had been hit by a car. "You want her?" my mother said. Her hands were shaking now. "Fine, you can have her. I'm done. I am so done. I'm going to my sister's tonight. I'll have my things out of the house by Sunday. You don't have to hide anymore. You don't have to lie anymore. You're free." She turned to leave. And I sat there with my hand over my mouth, tears streaming down my face, because I had done this. I had set this in motion. I had blown up my parents' marriage in the middle of a steakhouse with a 60-second video. Linea. It was the first word my father had spoken. Just one word. Her name, the name only he was allowed to use. She stopped walking, her back to him, her shoulders rising and falling. "Linny, please sit down." "Don't," she said, without turning around. "Don't you dare. Linny, look at me. Please." Slowly, she turned. Her face was a wreck of tears and rage, and something underneath both of those that I couldn't name. My father stood up. He didn't move toward her. He just stood, and then he did something I never could have predicted in a million years. He turned to the woman in the black dress and said, "Margaret, would you stand up, please?" The woman, Margaret, slowly rose from her side of the booth, looking like she wanted to disappear into the floor. "Linny," my father said, and his voice was thick now, full of tears he was trying to hold back. "This is Margaret Hollis. She is Father Brennan's sister." My mother just stared at him. "Father Brennan," my father said again, "from Street Stevens. The priest who married us. Margaret is his sister. She flew in this morning from Phoenix." The whole restaurant was silent. I could hear the ice machine humming behind the bar. "I don't understand," my mother whispered. "Father Brennan died on Tuesday, Linny." My mother's hand flew up to her mouth. "Margaret called me yesterday morning, while you were at your book club. She wanted me to know before it was in the paper. He had a stroke. They've been planning the service for Saturday. I've been on the phone with her all week, helping her sort through some things, because she has nobody else who knew him from before he became a priest. They were a year apart. They were everything to each other." He turned to Margaret, who was now openly crying. Margaret asked if she could buy me dinner tonight to thank me for helping her and to share some old stories about Stephen. About her brother. The man who blessed our marriage 34 years ago. He looked back at my mother. "I've been trying to figure out how to tell you all week. I knew it would break your heart. You loved Father Brennan. Remember how he called you Linny first, and that's where I got it? I wanted to tell you over coffee tomorrow. I had it all planned out." My mother lowered her hand from her mouth. Her face had gone white. "The hand-holding, Linny," my father said, and his voice broke completely now. "She was telling me about the night her husband died 8 years ago, and how Stephen flew out to Phoenix and stayed with her for 3 weeks. She just needed somebody to hold her hand for a minute. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry it looked like something else. I would never. Linny, you know I would never. My mother's knees buckled. Daniel was already up and moving toward her, and a man at a nearby table caught her elbow before she could fall. She let herself be lowered into a chair somebody had pulled out. She was sobbing now, full-body sobs, the kind that come from somewhere deep. "I'm so sorry," she kept saying. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." My father knelt in front of her chair and took both of her hands. "Linny, look at me." She couldn't. She was crying too hard. "Look at me, please." She finally lifted her face. "Did you really believe I would do that?" he said. "After 34 years. Did you really believe that of me?" "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know anymore. We've been so far apart, Robert. You've been so quiet. So distant. I thought you didn't love me anymore. I thought you'd stopped." And then Hannah sent the video, and I just believed it. I'm so ashamed. "I have been quiet," my father said softly. "I have been distant. You're right about that. I haven't known how to talk to you for a long time, Linny. I retired in March, and I have been sitting in that house all day every day waiting for you to come home from work. And you come home and you eat dinner, and you go to your book club or your gardening club or your church committee, and I just sit there. I feel like a piece of furniture. I haven't known how to tell you that either. I should have. I should have told you a long time ago. I'm sorry too." She squeezed his hands so hard her knuckles went white. "Stephen died, Linny. Father Brennan is gone. The man who married us is gone. And I sat down at this table tonight to talk about him with the only person in the world who knew him the way I did, and I started thinking about how short life is, and how I'd been wasting all this time being too proud to tell you I felt invisible. I was going to come home tonight and ask you to dance with me in the kitchen. Like we used to." My mother folded forward and pressed her forehead to their joined hands and just wept. I realized I was crying too. So was Daniel. So was Margaret, standing there in her black dress with her hands clasped at her chest. So was the waitress holding her tray. So were the couple at the table next to ours. The whole restaurant had gone soft and damp with crying. After a long minute, my mother lifted her head and looked at Margaret. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry about your brother. He was a wonderful man. He was a wonderful man." Margaret just nodded, unable to speak. My mother turned and looked at me for the first time. I felt my stomach drop. I expected her to be angry. I expected her to ask me how I could have done this without calling her first, without asking him first, without giving anyone the benefit of the doubt. But she didn't look angry. She just looked tired and sad and a little bit grateful. "Hannah," she said. I got up and walked over. Daniel followed. "You did the right thing," she said. "You did exactly what a daughter should do. You don't ever apologize for loving me enough to tell me the truth as you saw it." I started crying all over again. My father stood up and pulled me into a hug, and the smell of his aftershave, the same brand he had worn my entire life, made me feel about 6 years old. "I'm sorry, Daddy," I whispered. "Don't you dare," he said into my hair. "Don't you dare be sorry. You love your mother. You did right." The four of us, my parents, Daniel, and me, ended up sitting at a big table in the back of the restaurant. Margaret joined us, and so did the manager, who insisted on bringing us a round of drinks on the house. Margaret told us stories about Father Brennan as a young man, before he found his calling, when he was a baseball-obsessed kid in Pittsburgh who used to put frogs in their mother's shoes. My mother laughed until she cried, and then cried until she laughed. My father sat next to her with his arm around her shoulders the whole night, and she leaned into him like she was trying to make up for every inch of distance she'd let grow between them. When we finally stood up to leave, almost 3 hours later, my mother caught my arm and pulled me aside near the coat check. "Hannah, honey, I want to tell you something." "Okay." I almost lost him tonight. Not because of what I thought I saw, because of what I'd stopped seeing for months before tonight. He was right there in the house with me, and I had stopped looking at him. Don't do that with Daniel. I'm begging you. Don't wait until you almost lose him to remember what you have. I looked across the room at Daniel, who was talking with my father, both of them laughing about something. He glanced over and met my eyes, and I felt that flutter again, the one I'd felt that morning when I read his text in the parking lot. "I won't, Mom," I said. "I promise." We walked out into the cold spring air, and my father held my mother's hand all the way to the car, and she leaned her head against his shoulder while he opened her door for her. Daniel and I drove home in silence, but it wasn't the empty silence of the last 2 years. It was the full kind of silence, the kind where two people don't need to talk because they already understand. When we got home, Daniel didn't go straight to bed the way he usually did. He pulled a record off the shelf, an old Otis Redding album his grandfather had given him, put it on the player, and held out his hand to me in the middle of our living room. "Dance with me?" he said. So I did. We swayed in the dark with the lamp off and the music low, and I rested my head on his chest and listened to his heart beating, and I thought about my mother's words, and I held on to him a little tighter than usual. That was 2 weeks ago. My parents have already gone away for a long weekend together, just the two of them, somewhere in the mountains. They sent me a picture of them on a porch swing with mugs of coffee, my father's arm around her, both of them smiling like teenagers. My mother captioned it, "Found him again." Daniel and I have started having dinner at the kitchen table every night. No phones, no TV, just us. Some nights we run out of things to say in 5 minutes. Some nights we talk for 2 hours. Either way, we sit there until one of us reaches across the table for the other one's hand. I learned something in that restaurant that I'm going to carry with me for the rest of my life. Marriages don't usually die from one big betrayal. They die quietly, one missed glance at a time, one unanswered question at a time, one busy evening at a time, until two people are sitting in the same house, sharing the same name, and not really knowing each other anymore. The good news, the thing that nearly broke me with relief that night, is that it works the other way too. You can find your way back. You can choose, in any moment, to look up from your phone, to put down your work, to walk across the kitchen, and to say the name of the person who has been waiting for you to remember them. My father called my mother Linny again that night for the first time in months. She told me later it was the sweetest sound she'd heard in years. Don't wait for a video to remind you. Look up. Look across the room. Say their name. They are still there, and they are still hoping you'll see them.